Welcome to Verified Fears. Tonight, we're journeying into the heart of Canada's silent roads, where routine drives turn into reality-bending nightmares. These are true stories of road trips corrupted by something impossible, where isolation, distorted time, and the unknown push ordinary travelers to their breaking point. The first thing you notice out on the endless stretch of highway is the peculiar intimacy that isolation brings. It's not the comfort of being alone, but rather the unsettling sense that some intelligence behind the static and silence, is studying you as carefully as you navigate the double yellow lines. Mark, a civil engineer who prided himself on rationality, gripped in the wheel tighter with each passing kilometer. The dashboard clock ticked forward, and for a moment he thought about how time, in places like this, can stop feeling linear, stretching and folding under the weight of endless asphalt and dusk. His route was routine, arranged around a family visit and professional duty. But he couldn't shake a childhood memory of riding this very road, his father humming along to the radio, both blissfully unaware that music could become an omen. Tonight, the sky was the color of bruises, streaked with purple-black clouds and an uneasy wind that rattled every loose panel of the car. The roadside forests pressed in, their forms tempting the imagination with all they concealed beyond the glare of passing headlights. Mark set the radio to a local station, chatter, pop melodies, then a presenter discussing weather alerts for southern districts. He'd only driven half an hour when the first anomaly cut through the monotony. An abrupt, abrasive burst of static, followed by a precise, metallic voice listing details that didn't make sense. Tragic pileup on Route 7. Time, 10:54 p.m. tonight. Emergency services advised. Multiple fatalities. The broadcast looped once, then faded beneath a generic jingle, leaving Mark blinking at the dial. Route 7? That was several towns south, not on his itinerary. He rationalized. Maybe a badly timed recording, or some regional alert overlapping signals. Yet as he pressed the seek button, the news returned, now describing a flood, referencing airports and evacuation notices nowhere near this region. It was as though he'd tuned into some future national disaster hotline, a relay of warnings and catastrophe that hadn't transpired. He decided to ignore it, switching to a music station. But before he could get comfortable, the headlights of a semi behind him flashed in a distinct sequence. 3 times quick, then a pause, then again. The truck drew close enough for Mark to see the driver's face in his mirror, expressionless, staring not at the road, but directly at Mark. The CB radio, which Mark never used, squawked out a voice. "You hear that too?" The trucker sounded equally disturbed. For several long seconds, static warped both their signals, conveying what Mark could only call a syncopation of dread. He passed a sign for a minor intersection, none of the names registered, as if the province itself had rearranged maps while he drove. Fog drifted in from the lakes. GPS lost satellite. Its screen shimmered and vanished, every attempt to reboot resulting in error messages repeating, "Rerouting, rerouting." As Mark slowed, the radio's voice returned, this time announcing a fiery collision at the edge of a bridge Mark didn't remember crossing. "If you're traveling north," the broadcast said, "be cautious, impact imminent." Against his better judgment, Mark pulled over. He watched as the semi pulled up beside him, cab lights flickering in uncertainty. "You getting the disaster alerts?" Mark called out through his cracked window. The trucker nodded, his face pale beneath the neon wash of dashboard lights. "Been hearing accidents all night, even ones that haven't happened. Names, times, places, Some sound like my old runs back east. But then, he trailed off, eyes fixing on Mark's radio as it started again, announcing a chemical spill at a town Mark hadn't even heard of, set for 11:30 tonight. The fog thickened. The woods seemed to amplify each transmission. Every staticky hiss echoed as if the trees themselves were repeating events back in a language of wind. Just as Mark moved to leave, the trucker gripped his arm, knuckles white. "When you come to the bridge, don't stop for anyone." His words were clipped, desperate. Mark drove on more cautiously now. The clock ticked forward, and every news item seemed to sync more closely with his own path. The bridge appeared with abrupt clarity, long steel arches disappearing into phantasmal mist, orange lights undulating in the gloom. It was unmistakable, yet completely foreign, as though conjured from the nervous predictions of a dozen emergency broadcasts. Halfway across, the disaster Mark had heard was already unfolding. Screeching tires, flares of red and yellow on the asphalt, the screaming cacophony of twisting metal. Mark's own car, or an uncanny replica, lay crumpled ahead. He saw himself inside, motionless, then blinking, then turning to stare straight at Mark as he approached. For an agonizing moment, their gazes met. Mark's mind split, one part certain this was hallucination, another obsessed with tracking every detail, every license plate, every flickering light. The truck that had followed him was overturned, flames licking its side. Emergency vehicles hovered just outside the mist, their silhouettes warped and mutable. Mark slammed on the brakes. His body responded on muscle memory, the rational part of him screaming for answers, the primal side knowing only panic. The scene resolved into sharper focus. He watched as rescue workers dragged his alternate self from the wreckage. But then the vision flickered, dissolving into white noise. He blinked, and the road was clear. The accident vanished, time slipping backward, forward, and then halting altogether. Shaking, he accelerated toward the next patch of open highway. Now the radio was a relentless companion. News broadcasts cycling through calamities Mark hadn't yet experienced, some too precise to be fabricated, others eerily vague. Every announcement matched in tone and cadence, as if delivering a rehearsal for reality. Mark kept driving, unable to turn off the radio for fear of what silence might offer instead. The trucker's warning haunted him, replaying in each passing headlight. When the fog thinned, Mark found himself on a stretch of road that felt impossibly empty. No towns, no intersections, just a black ribbon of pavement dividing forests that seemed to lean in closer with each mile. The radio's looped voices calmed, switching to ambient music, then soft, gentle instructions about emergency preparedness. He realized, with a cold certainty, that the broadcasts were leading him, not merely informing but shaping the path, as though the disasters weren't warnings but markers, coded signs that dictated which turns to take and when. Mark's thoughts spiraled. What if the disasters narrated by the radio weren't predictions, but invitations? What if every road is haunted not by the dead, but by the living, cycling through endless contingencies, waiting for one to bleed into reality? Mark's own drive felt preordained, and each variation, each alternate version of himself glimpsed in fog or flame, seemed to test his conviction, his very sense of self. In the aftermath, when the sky finally began its descent into morning, Mark felt changed, not simply spooked, but fundamentally shifted. The radio still played in the background, its broadcasts gentler, but somehow more unnerving for their mundanity. He reached his destination, but every detour, every intersection, seemed loaded with significance. Sleep eluded him. Familiar roads took on uncanny angles. Memories of disaster flickered behind every mundane announcement. He started researching the stories he'd heard, news items that hadn't happened yet, missing persons cases that sounded like distorted versions of his own name and profession. None appeared in the public record, nothing matched. Yet some nights, in the mist and the dark, the radio would crackle with static, calling him by his first name, delivering updates in a tone that matched perfectly the unease of that original drive. Ultimately, Mark accepted what every survivor of the unknown must. Out on the road, isolation isn't simply the absence of company. It's the presence of something observing, waiting, measuring your faith in reality. The broadcasts, however twisted, became his markers, a kind of communion with the infinite possibilities every journey holds. Does fate drive us forward? Or do we become fate the moment we choose to listen? In the relentless quiet, with the highway stretching ahead and the radio always tuned to something beyond the veil, Mark understood that terror isn't the presence of disaster. It's the lingering question in the static, the unsettling certainty that the next message, the next forecast, the next voice in the loop might not just describe the future, but decide its shape before your very eyes. No shortcut ever saved time on the roads that cut through early morning haze, especially for someone who trusted logistics more than luck. Emily, a diligent graduate of medical school, was driving through unfamiliar territory, her mind mapping out the route with clinical efficiency, every landmark an affirmation of progress. Yet what the highway sent back was not reassurance, but a subtle invitation, a promise of convenience made malignant by repetition. The first detour appeared in soft blue from her phone's navigation app. An alternate path marked overpass route, supposed to shave 10 minutes from her commute. She took it, turning off the main drag into the rising mists over the pine forest, letting the early sun slip as she crossed onto poured concrete spanning an ocean of branches below. It should have been a minor change, a deviation logged for efficiency, but something about the air felt off, too dense, as though it resisted the intrusion of headlights and morning radio. 1 mile passed, then another. Emily noted the signs, the standard green placards with white text, posts driven deep into gravel. Each displayed identical information, and each seemed a perfect copy of the last. For a while, she suspected a minor error, common enough in rural infrastructure, recycled sign units, limited funding, perhaps a lazy maintenance crew. But the suspicion soured as she ticked off 3, then 4, then 8 identical signs. Everyone spaced exactly apart, every pockmark and scratch repeated. Her phone chimed again. The estimated time kept fluctuating, sometimes displaying she'd arrived already, other times predicting hours before her destination. Emily dismissed it, attributing the hiccup to weak reception amid thick pines. The radio crackled, looping a local forecast 3 times before abruptly switching languages. First French, then a voice she thought might be Cree, then back to news. The transition seamless, without a single commercial break. The overpass curved gently overhead. After a dozen minutes, Emily realized the road below looked eerily familiar. She recognized the arrangement of rocks, the ripple in the tree line, even the burnished streak of morning sunlight passing through smoke from an unseen campfire. The repetition unsettled her, clashing against her sense of rational continuity. Yet she forced herself onward, dismissing it as mere déjà vu, the brain's trick in monotonous landscape. Several more minutes tumbled by, lost in the hum of tires on concrete. Emily became certain she'd passed the same pothole 4 times. A shallow wound in the road, always in the same place, flanked by identical rain-worn paint. Her fuel gauge, which she'd checked consciously at the overpass entrance, now ticked down rapidly, as if the car had quadrupled its consumption rate. She clicked onto a podcast for focus. But the episode 2 repeated, every sentence replaying at precisely the same interval. The hosts laughing in perfect synchronization, as if trapped in some mechanical loop. Mild irritation shifted toward something more primal. A sense of being surveilled, not by cameras or drones, but by the road itself. Emily checked her rearview mirror and glimpsed a car behind her, tinted windows and silver bodywork. It hovered too close, never passing, never receding, its lights matching her every turn. On the next loop, she realized the license plate was her own. Desperation forced Emily to experiment. She changed lanes, even slowed to a crawl. The pursuit never faltered. Car and convoy repeating, always behind, always identical. Around one bend, she braked and pulled over, letting the follower pass. But the car didn't overtake, didn't acknowledge her. It idled behind, then faded as the mist thickened, multiples of its shape appearing in peripheral vision, like splintered reflections. Emily decided to turn around, an action both logical and unnatural. Whoever reversed on an overpass when there was no traffic, no obstacle, just repetition? As she swung the car, every system shuddered. Headlights flickered, digital clock on the dashboard blinked 3:14, repeating into nonsense, then freezing. The GPS announced, "You have reached your destination," only for the map to dissolve, leaving a pulsing blue dot. Going backward proved just as fruitless. The scenery, trees, signs, potholes, merged and melted into sameness, each loop less distinct, as though reality was losing resolution. Emily rolled down her window for air and was met with silence. No birds, no wind, just the persistent hum of the car's engine and the faint echo of her own breathing. She felt weightless for a moment, not in the pleasant sense of release, but as though gravity itself was reconsidering its grip. The isolation amplified. Emily scanned for other signs of life, any anomaly that would signal disruption from the loop. To her astonishment, she saw figures standing at intervals on the shoulder, impossible silhouettes, blurred by morning light, gazing with the attentive detachment of statues. As she approached, none moved, but their heads turned in unison, each action mirrored and delayed as though rehearsed. The phone buzzed, displaying text in reverse. "Go forward." She ignored it, heart racing, and attempted another U-turn. Now the maze of repetition was complete. Each attempt to deviate dragged her further into the strange continuum. A radio station played her last voicemail, her own voice warping into a metallic parody. The fuel gauge dropped alarmingly low, and when she tried to call roadside assistance, her phone connected to a looped, distorted version of her mother's emergency contact, speaking sentences Emily remembered from years ago, but in an unfamiliar, anxious cadence. "Keep driving, Em. Go until the shortcut ends." Reality began to implode. Her skin crawled with the sense of eyes watching, though only those distant figures stood sentry, silhouettes blending into the mist. The car's mirrors showed her own face, but slightly out of sync. Expressions delayed, a smile forming too late. A worried frown lingering until the vehicle jolted and her attention snapped. Gas fumes crept under the dashboard, acrid and relentless. The terrain outside the window looked flatter, reduced to a series of repeating patterns, a world stripped of depth. Then the car died. No gas, no electricity, dashboard lights dimming to black. Emily sat in the silence, surrounded by a gallery of her own unfinished actions. The ignition key turning, her hand gripping the steering wheel, every movement echoing in the burnt reflection of the windshield. The figures on the road approached, not walking but flickering closer with each blink. Emily tried the door. It opened, but the air outside felt heavier, pressing down on her with the intent of keeping her in place. She remembered old horror stories, urban legends about endless highways, about being trapped in dreams where escape meant repetition. The professional mind wanted to map the phenomenon, to explain away the impossibility. The human mind just wanted release. Frantic, she climbed into the back seat, searching for anything to anchor herself, a receipt, a photograph, her badge. Every item bore her name, but with the date reversed, 20/91/5202. Even the fabric of her clothing felt unfamiliar, seams twisting in directions she would never have chosen. She screamed, not for help, but to break the loop. The sound was instantly snapped up by the silence, vanishing, not even echoing against the window. When she checked her phone again, the text had shifted. Drive backward. A sliver of hope. Perhaps backward was a route to freedom. She slid behind the wheel, turned the ignition, and the engine roared back to life. The road outside seemed brighter, the mist thinning at last. She pressed the gas, committed to reversal, watching carefully for the end. A break in the sameness, an off-ramp, a sign that didn't match. Slowly, the shortcut unraveled. The road grew distinct. The pothole vanished. The trees arranged themselves into normal disorder. Voices of birds crept through the window. Emily's fear did not subside. Relief was muted, almost clinical. At the far end of the overpass, she found herself facing the original entrance. But everything was different. The clock now read noon, her fuel gauge full. Bag of belongings reordered, phone cleaned of all messages. For weeks after, she navigated highways with caution, dreading every detour, trusting nothing automated or offered by unfamiliar convenience. In the mirrors, rear view, side, and bathroom, shadows flickered, sometimes taking the shape of her own expression, sometimes blending into the world around her with impossible delay. She caught her own reflection in grocery store windows, trailing a split second behind, insistent she was still on that bridge. Music on the radio took on new, uneasy tones, songs looping into self-parody. When she spoke to friends, they seemed distracted, their sentences looping. Emily's shortcut had not simply offered her a faster route. It had revealed the cost, the price paid for every time-saving measure, for every moment of trust given to convenience. She never spoke of the figures, or the maze, or the silent repetition that threatened to erase the individual for the sake of efficiency. Instead, she simply drove slower, lingering on familiar roads, savoring every unique pothole and every spontaneous deviation the landscape offered. She came to wonder, are shortcuts ever really shortcuts? Or do we find the price in repetition, a price everyone pays when reality bows to pattern and memory? In the months ahead, Emily found comfort only in variety, in unpredictability. If the road ever offered her another perfect overpass, she'd be ready to refuse the detour, letting others take the paths that promise speed, while she took her place among the winding uncertainty of the ordinary, having glimpsed the cost of convenience on a morning overpass that never quite ended. There's a chilling honesty to the open highway that cuts through the forested heartland, an honesty born not of what the land shares, but of what it omits. For Sam, a wildlife biology grad, the absence of mile markers was the first warning that tonight's fieldwork would not be like any before. The old logging road had no towns, no convenient turnoffs, just a blacktop wending endlessly beneath a sky that seemed to hang a few feet lower than normal. pressing the trees flat against the ground in warped perspective. Sam adjusted the rearview mirror, watching the receding darkness swallow the tail end of his pickup. His logbook detailed the trip. A simple hours-out survey, trapping small mammals, running tags on deer and foxes. He'd grown up in open spaces, certain that the wilderness, for all its legendary dangers, comforted more than threatened. But as he rolled past the highway warning sign, a blank rectangle where painted mileage should have been, the familiar became unmoored. In the roadside gloom, every pine twisted into an impassable wall. Every empty stretch of blacktop a corridor through memory. The truck's headlights caught something on the shoulder. An abandoned shape, barely visible behind a tangle of grass and fir needles. Sam slowed and peered out. The vehicle was identical to his own. Red paint streaked with dust, dented rear fender, even the same faded sticker from a long-defunct band. Ice pinched his spine. He parked and approached, expecting the thrill of explanation, the ordinary logic of mistaken identity. A neighbor's vehicle, perhaps, or a survey team left by forestry officials. But the cab was empty, the driver's door locked. And inside lay an old jacket, same as the one on Sam's passenger seat. Navy blue, studded with the pale embroidery of his college logo. He tried the license plate. The numbers matched his own perfectly. For a few moments, he wandered alongside the twin, his own footsteps echoing too loudly, his breath smoke in the cold air. Every piece of dust caught his eye, every hairline scratch and fleck of paint matching precisely. He scrubbed a hand over his face and forced himself back behind his own wheel, refusing to look back. Faulty memory, he muttered. Trick of the light. He eyed the empty road ahead, tapping nervously by habit. Phone, logbook, snack wrappers. Everything was in place, but the feeling of being shadowed refused to dissipate. As the night pressed in, Sam drove deeper into the woods, anxious to finish his survey and return to civilization. But soon, the highway provided another mystery. A handwritten note taped to a weathered sign, the paper flapping in the chilled air. Don't stop. Time overlaps. Sam squinted, wondering at the message's origins. Was it an inside joke, a local legend, some cryptic memorial to a tragedy left unreported? The note's odd cadence clung to his thoughts, an itch he could not scratch. The tunnel came next, a stretch of road bored through rock, half lit by failing orange lamps. Inside, the acoustics changed. The radio emitted whispers, layered voices too soft and slurry to parse. Sam tried to adjust the frequency, but the only result was static. The voices swelled, overlapping with each other, until one phrase broke through clear and sharp. You're almost there. Find the markers. It was his own voice, or something close enough to unsettle him. Sam groped for courage, focusing on biology, data, the rational causes behind echoes and interference. Emerging from the tunnel, the road looked altered. Signs had returned, spaced evenly along the shoulder. But the numbers were counting backwards now, diminishing with every mile. 500, 400, 350, 320. The forest thickened. The branches gnarled into unlikely shapes. Each bend looked familiar, but wrong. The kind of repetition seen only in dreams or fever. Sam flipped through his logbook, matching notes on animal encounters. But every page had shifted. Names went missing, handwriting thinned, dates reversed. His phone, always on low battery, blinked messages in sequence. Warning. Overlap detected. Remain calm. He snorted, the bravado of youth receding, replaced by a gnawing sense of being the experiment rather than the observer. Unsettled, Sam reviewed a story he'd heard as a child, the account of a missing hiker, lost for days, then discovered asleep miles off course, clutching a notebook with scrambled entries. At the time, it had felt like a parable, a warning against arrogance. Now, the parallels gnawed at him. What if the road itself was conscious, reconstructing memory through travelers' fears and expectations? Up ahead, a new sign appeared, warped and leaning as if deliberately obstructed. No markers beyond this point, no rescue beyond this line. Sam hesitated at the boundary, the logic of adventure warring with sudden survival instinct. But curiosity drove him on. He pressed the accelerator, the groan of weathered tires muffled beneath the weight of breath and imagination. Within the newly markerless stretch, the atmosphere thickened. The air seemed to vibrate with potential, as though on the verge of being sliced. Sam's mind spiraled back to the truck on the side of the road. The message on the sign, stories of vanished travelers. He remembered the lost hiker's journal, the strangeness of entries written in reverse, dates and names bleeding into chaos. Minutes stretched, 10, then 30, then an hour folded into a minute, then a minute into an hour. The forest was a solid green wall, the blacktop a featureless portal. Sam's memory of his own journey became slippery. He forgot which direction he was moving, what led him here, even his reason for recording mammal data in the first place. A creeping dread replaced data with sensation, the certainty of being observed by something vast, not animal, but atmospheric, a malignant will woven from the repeating quiet. At the edge of comprehension, Sam glimpsed movement. A figure, barely visible, moved along the margin of the forest, identical in shape and build, cloaked in that same college jacket. Sam's engine stuttered, headlights flickered, and the figure froze, head tilted toward the shadows as if listening for the echo of his thoughts. For a breathless instant, they connected. A moment of mutual recognition, estrangement threaded through shared memory. Then the figure retreated into the green gloom, erased by distance and fear. A gust of wind rattled loose the last certainties. The road beneath Sam flickered. Numbers on the dashboard running in reverse. Radio now looping emergency broadcasts from missing person reports decades old. The reports began describing Sam himself. His name, age, expected route. Last seen on logging road northbound. The same details he'd written in his own logbook that afternoon. Panic set in. Sam braked hard, skidding to a stop as the world tumbled. Headlights illuminated nothing but fog and the receding shape of a distant truck. The same make and color, emptied by absence. He checked his reflection, half expecting not to see his own eyes. Relieved at the familiarity, yet haunted by the subtle shifts in expression, the infinitesimal delays of movement. Trying to retrace his route, Sam searched for landmarks, but found only repetition. Sapling, rock, sign, all cycling through the same pattern. He realized the resolution to escape must lie not in forward motion, but in understanding the loops. How memory and fear become machinery for survival in places that recognize the mind as easily as the body. The next hour blurred. A crash of headlights and shadow, a sequence of messages from the radio and phone instructing him to leave something behind, break the memory. Sam removed his college jacket, left it folded on the passenger seat, and felt a release. A fractional easing of tension, as if the road had acknowledged his offering. The markers reappeared, counting up instead of down, each a sign of restored chronology. Ahead, the forest finely thinned, the road opening into new terrain, blue sky struggling through cloud cover. When Sam emerged onto the main highway, he sensed the shift. Not relief, quite, but the relief of constraint. The world had resumed its ordinary rhythm, the markers restored, the time on his phone matching expectations. Yet when he checked the rearview mirror, the shape of a truck glimmered in the distance. Always following, never quite catching up. A reminder of the road's memory. For days afterward, the story replayed in Sam's mind, each retelling loosening the threads of what had really happened. News broadcasts reported a new missing person. His own data, swapped into the story he'd studied as a boy. The hiker, now himself. The truck on the shoulder, always waiting. He understood finally what the markerless roads had taught him. Every journey through wilderness is a journey through repetition. And every missing marker an invitation to wander, not just through geography, but through the folds and overlaps of time and identity. Every expedition thereafter carried the lesson: carry no unneeded memories, count only the markers you can touch, and beware the places where the numbers fade. The open highway is never truly empty. It is crowded with the echoes of every anxious traveler seeking direction, hoping the road itself remembers them when they can no longer remember themselves. The open road at midnight is not truly empty. It is a stage set for encounters that couldn't happen in daylight, a passage over which past and present drift like smoke. For Harper, a seasoned truck driver with military discipline and a skeptical faith shaped by years of survival. The shoulder of the highway was usually nothing more than a strip of gravel, a zone for blown tires and coffee breaks. But tonight, under a moon so thin it might have been scratched into the sky, she felt watched. Not by law enforcement or wildlife, but by something that remembered her name before she'd ever shown her face. Harper was heading north with a half-full load of timber and iron, running against the clock to make delivery before sunrise. The route was ordinary enough, a straight shoot through evergreen woods that glimmered with frost. Radio tuned to a late-night talk show, eyes flicking from mirror to dash and back. She trusted her instincts, leaned into routine, and carried a tiny cross on her dashboard. A private talisman meant more for comfort than confession. Her faith was complex, forged in war zones, battered by heartbreak, carried quietly into the lonelier corners of her life. She almost never stopped for hitchhikers. It was a rule, hammered into her by decades of warnings and one unforgettable story from boot camp. But as she rounded a curve just past midnight, her headlights carved out the silhouette of a lone figure, thumb extended, face half-turned. A young man in a threadbare coat, the kind travelers wore before the world spun so fast. Harper slowed out of caution, not kindness, prepared to wave him off and keep rolling. But then the figure called her name, clear and certain, as though they were old friends. Harper. The voice cut through the radio chatter and the boundaries of expectation. Harper inched up, her instincts pinging between fight and flight. She rolled the window down a crack, keeping her hand on the concealed lever for the truck's flashlight. "How do you know me?" she asked. The hitchhiker smiled, not warmly, but with a sort of weary relief. "You helped me once," he said. "A long time ago. But it's cold now." Harper blinked. She had helped thousands in her drives. Stranded travelers, lost pets, fragments of broken lives left by the road. But this face was unfamiliar, and his coat seemed impossibly thin for a night with temperatures already plunging. She weighed her options, calculated the risks. Curiosity won, and she unlocked the passenger side door. He climbed in quietly, smelling faintly of rain and old wood. His hands were folded in his lap, trembling in rhythm with the rumble of the road. Harper glanced at him sidelong, noticing every detail. A patch sewn to his sleeve, a scar on the jaw, eyes that flickered with stories unspoken. He asked for warmth and silence, never directions. As they rolled along, Harper's truck felt different, heavier, as though carrying other passengers besides this stranger. Then she noticed something subtle. The dashboard cam, always reliable, was blinking out of sync. The device's feed appeared scrambled, dark outlines flickering across its screen. And when she glanced in the mirror, the hitchhiker's reflection lagged and faded, a shadow that barely mirrored his body. The radio hissed, skipping channels in bursts of static and momentary distortion, as though tuned to another dimension. They passed a rest stop, its lights ominously dark. The young man pointed. "We're close," he murmured. His tone wasn't urgent, but Harper sensed weight beneath the words. She stifled questions, remembering her father's lesson. Sometimes roadside encounters are only half meant for you. Sometimes you're just the vessel for stories trying to return to the world. Suddenly, Harper's headlights swept over another figure. A woman standing stone still beside an overturned sedan, her hair blown by wind that did not touch any trees. The woman's lips moved soundlessly as Harper drove past, her eyes locking with Harper's in a flash of recognition. An expression of gratitude or warning, Harper couldn't tell. When she checked her rearview mirror, the sedan was gone, and the road behind had swallowed any evidence of accident or presence. The hitchhiker fell silent. The further they drove, the more Harper sensed a change in the shadows outside, the way the edges of reality seemed to fray. Patches of frost on the shoulder melted and reformed. Tire tracks flickered in and out of view, and the double yellow line on the road quivered as if resisting some cosmic wind. Harper cleared her throat. "You said I helped you?" she asked again. He nodded, voice echoing mutedly. "You stopped. That mattered." As the truck approached another dark stretch, the climate inside the cabin shifted, air thickening, warmth draining away. Harper noticed her breath growing visible, each exhale tracing a fleeting signature under moonlight. She pushed up the heater, but the vents remained cold, and her cross rattled against the dashboard, ticking in time with the dashcam malfunction. On the roadside, shapes congregated, less human than memory, less memory than hope. One form, then another, flickered into existence. A man with a child's backpack, a woman carrying an old suitcase, a cluster of faces pressed close in silent yearning. The hitchhiker pressed his forehead to the window, whispering something under his breath. A prayer or a farewell. Harper couldn't distinguish which. She felt herself slipping out of the present and into a world stitched from echoes and regrets. It escalated without warning. The radio blasted voices, calls for help, fragments of songs, news updates from years she couldn't recall. Harper's grip on the wheel tightened, her knuckles straining white, every muscle lit with nervous electricity. The truck shuddered, dashcam stuttering into black, gauges flashing in a random, panicked sequence. The hitchhiker's voice, now a chorus, filled the cabin. "We're all trying to get home. Just one last ride." Harper gasped. Outside, the shapes crowded the shoulder, advancing but never stepping on the road. Her headlights passed through their bodies as though lighting vapor. She tried to call for help, but the phone was dead. Every screen in the truck repeating a tangled mess of numbers, dates, times, coordinates, looping endlessly. In those frantic minutes, Harper's memories convulsed. War's aftermath, lonely highway nights, rescue missions gone wrong, every single time she had stopped, or almost stopped, for someone in need. The faces blended, stories collided, time buckled. She felt herself pulled between then and now, as the world shrank down to one point. A woman behind the wheel, a soul beside her, a legion of the forgotten standing sentry at the midnight border. And then, just as quickly, the temperature returned, the dash cam reset, and the truck's engine found a steady rhythm. The hitchhiker turned, smiled faintly, and whispered, "Never forget the road behind." With an ease that contradicted his thin frame, he opened the door and disappeared before Harper could protest. The world outside was quiet again. Frost returning to the shoulder, shapes dissolving into darkness. Harper drove on, the cabin lighter, the road ahead clearer, but tinged with the residue of questions she dared not articulate. Every mirror now displayed odd refractions, angles and shadows with no clear source, ghostly shapes flickering on the edges of vision. Sometimes she caught glimpses of passengers she never loaded, the outline of a suitcase, the soft glimmer of grateful eyes. In the weeks that followed, Harper grew more deliberate in her journeys. She checked each mirror twice, avoided deserted stretches at midnight whenever possible, and adjusted her cross so that it hung securely, no longer clattering in time with nerves. But the lesson remained. The road was never wholly empty, and the living share it with more than just the cars and asphalt. Sometimes, in moments when faith felt brittle, she remembered the hitchhiker's words. The gratitude of the saved clings to the air, lingering like exhaust in cold rain. The world's roads are stitched together not by paint and gravel, but by brief acts of witness, by hands extended at the margin, by the courage to stop when every instinct says go. Harper's nights grew quieter, but every journey carried an echo. The sense that the dead ride their own highways, asking nothing but the memory of compassion, needing only a witness to validate their passage. She learned to pray with her eyes open, to navigate both the world's dangers and its mysteries, and to trust that kindness leaves footprints deeper than fear. As the seasons changed, frost retreated, headlights gleamed over thawed highways, and Harper carried on, driving further, stopping less often, but never forgetting that sometimes the shoulder of the road is more than a place to rest. Sometimes it's a portal, a line where the worlds tangle, where names are remembered, and where the only way forward is to let the souls ride with you, quiet and unseen, until they reach whatever home eternity has set aside for them. Mist hung over the northern highway like a veil, obscuring everything but the bright green exit sign and the familiar anxiety that surfaces when a routine detour turns unsettling. For Riley, a non-binary park ranger with years spent wandering isolated forests, whose mind favored logic over superstition, this fog was a nuisance, not a threat. The route home from the station should have been simple. Take the exit ramp, find the rest area, gather composure before braving the last stretch through unlit woods. But tonight, the ramp seemed longer, sharper, swallowing more distance than memory recollected. Riley's thoughts darted through work notes and radio chatter. The road had always imposed a quiet discipline. Stay alert, be prepared, know when wilderness becomes inhospitable. Yet there was something foreign in the mist. A kind of density that slowed each breath and made tires grind louder on the pavement. Approaching the rest area, a familiar wooden sign rose up. The lettering tilted as though twisted by unseen hands, announcing facilities that no one in recent memory had actually used. The car rolled to a stop in the meager illumination of a solitary lamp. Riley scanned the lot. No vehicles, just patches of wet concrete and the distant rustle of needles in the pine wind. In the cabin, the air changed, becoming thick and coarse, weighing down shoulders and settling into lungs. They locked the doors by habit, but the act felt performative. theatrical against the implacable hush that had crept in with the fog. Needing respite and routine, Riley grabbed their flashlight, stepped onto the slick pavement, and crossed to the restroom building, a concrete box painted years ago, still shedding flakes and memories. Inside, the hallway was longer than expected, its corners receding into unnatural shadow where ceilings and walls failed to meet logically. Footsteps echoed, growing louder with each iteration, until Riley realized the sound was not just amplification, but duplication, as if someone, something, was trailing at an imperfect interval. Riley reached the first door, only for it to swing open without being touched. The interior was wrong. Not a restroom, but a mirrored hallway branching left and right, both directions lined with identical doors, each marked not with symbols, but with fragments of handwritten names. Some familiar, others impossible. The flashlight beam fractured, light scattering where it should have reflected, forcing Riley to step lightly and stick close to the walls. With each door tested, Riley sensed time shifting. Watches and phones ticked forward, resetting, 1 minute jumping into the next, while the world outside remained fixed in stasis. The sensation was subtle at first, a lag between thought and movement, a slow bleed of memory into the present, as if the building itself parsed time by its own design. Further in, belongings appeared, a scarf, a child's plastic toy, an empty water bottle stamped with a date from the previous decade. Riley bent to inspect a wallet, its ID card faded but recognizable. A ranger from 10 years prior, one of the region's missing, a name whispered on radios late at night but never spoken in daylight. The hallway grew colder, air tinged with something metallic, the scent of old snow and hidden decay. A doorway opened with a groan, revealing not a restroom, but a hallway tilting upward, leading into a fog-filled chamber. Gravity became uncertain. Every step demanded greater effort, feet dragging as if untethered from the certainty of weight. The lights flickered, and Riley's body felt oddly buoyant, like walking underwater but without the kindness of resistance. In distant corners, mist churned in shapes that mirrored their own posture, shadows mimicking stance and stride. Riley's phone vibrated, but the screen showed only static, the numbers melting and reforming. They tried to call for help, voice clipped by fear. But only a distorted echo answered, a child's voice repeating questions in reverse, words tumbling backward into meaninglessness until only the cadence remained. Panic crept in, urging retreat, commanding reason and routine. Riley recalled every training module, every advice given to calm lost hikers, and tried to regulate their breaths. A surge of adrenaline pressed Riley deeper into the maze, the flashlight straining with unnatural luminescence, as if fighting to illuminate truths meant to stay hidden. The walls became mirrors. With each glance, Riley saw not just themselves, but a dozen variations. Some smiling, some crying, some desperate. A cold chill seized their spine as the nearest reflection blinked in perfect unison, lips moving to spell their name in reverse. The reflection whispered something, mouth contorted in a silent scream, the glass warping as if ready to swallow. Riley stumbled through, emerging into a corridor painted not by craftsmen, but by time itself. Streaks and stains formed faces in the cracks, eyes blinking, mouths open in surprise or horror. The sound of water trickling inexplicably from overhead pipes became a chorus of voices, some old, some impossibly young, all detailing directions to nowhere. Riley clung to their flashlight, pressing forward, each step draining more energy, each heartbeat sinking with some deep, subsonic pulse beneath the concrete. A flicker of movement near the ceiling caught their eye. Small, weightless objects floating, spinning gently as though tugged by invisible hands. A faded photograph drifted down, landing by Riley's boot. The image was distorted but recognizable. A group photo from Ranger Academy, with one corner burned away, faces missing, date rewritten by trembling fingers. Every object in this warped place seemed to hold a message, a memory stripped of context and time, a warning encased in ambiguity. Beyond another door, the space changed again. No longer a hallway, but a vast, open lobby filled with objects from decades past. A rotary phone, a lunchbox, an old hiking pack with tags from a year Riley remembered as being filled with loss. The gravitational oddity deepened, time jumped forward, and the sense of imminent danger became more urgent. Every exit sign pointed inward, every wall reflected Riley back at themselves. At the center of the chamber, a large mirror stood propped against a broken chair. In its glass, Riley saw their own form. Hair streaked from anxiety, eyes wide with confusion, mouth set in determination. Then, as they watched, the image slipped backwards. The mirror self began speaking in reverse, syllables tumbling out so quietly that Riley had to concentrate to decipher. It was a message, half advice, half accusation, words that seemed to prick at old guilt and forgotten misdeeds. "You belong outside," the reflection murmured. "This place holds the lost, not the searching." Riley felt the world buckle, a surge of fear overwhelming rational analysis. They tore their gaze away, seeking a real door, not a mirrored trick, not a passage into unreality. Their flashlight dimmed, the batteries draining as if sapped by the building's hunger for attention. At the far end of the room, one door stood slightly open, light streaming through with the golden clarity of morning. Not fog, not artifice, but day. Riley charged forward, throwing their body against the door, tumbling through into brightness, the hallway collapsing behind. The world outside was changed. Air smelled different, sounds carried odd undertones, and every food and drink Riley tasted after was subtly wrong. As if reality had been recalibrated, their senses tuned to a new, less forgiving frequency. Back in the car, the fuel gauge flickered. Time seemed months ahead, and everything in the glove compartment was rearranged. Riley gripped the wheel so hard that it ached, vowing never to take another ramp without unyielding scrutiny. The mist had dissipated, and the highway stretched out. Ordinary, prosaic, a lifeline into mundane routine. But each day after, Riley noticed subtle cues that the rest stop remained changed. The taste of coffee, the pressure of boots on gravel, the resonance of voices over static were all colors faded and notes bent. Sometimes, dreams replayed the warped hallways and floating objects, waking them with heart pounding in the early morning. Other rangers asked about strange stories, rest area legends, travelers gone missing, objects reappearing years later. Riley rarely spoke of that night. But every time they passed a rest area, something inside tugged at caution, reminding them that some exits are less about escape than entrapment, and that rest is sometimes the price the world charges for revealing its secrets. In the reflection of office windows, in the shifting lights of dawn, in the delicate balance between fear and curiosity, Riley learned to trust only the roads that made sense, always wary never to linger long enough to remind the highway of their presence. For those who travel isolated paths, the rules are simple. Not every ramp leads back to the map. Not every rest brings relief. And sometimes the world bends in ways meant to be felt but never explained. Riley kept driving, and though the roads never bent quite right again, they accepted reality's new shape, the knowledge that rest itself can be a labyrinth, and that rules of physics and memory change sometimes just to keep you moving, wary and awake. The frozen vastness of a northern road in winter yields few comforts. But for Grant, a 51-year-old logistics manager and former police officer, the sight of his company's convoy was a welcome reassurance. There was a solidarity to the line of headlights threading through white drifts and ragged fur silhouettes, a punctuation of order against the night's looming chaos. It wasn't the wind, nor the ache of long hours, that kept Grant alert. It was protocol, the ritual checking of call signs, the confirmation that every truck tracked the expected path. Every voice on the radio belonged. Tonight, the convoy was 5 vehicles strong, engines rumbling as they devoured miles between deserted towns, the blur of motion carving a rhythm in the darkness. Grant led the pack, his truck brimming with steel reels and boxed machinery, the weight anchoring him to the world. Conversation was sparse. Radio etiquette demanded brevity, efficiency, never idle chatter. In the cold isolation, Grant's mind wandered to old cases, roads patrolled, accidents catalogued, horrors explained and unexplained. Just past the halfway point, the convoy slowed for a turn. Grant's radio crackled, a distortion, then the faint echo of his own call sign repeated by a voice that did not belong to anyone in their chain. Bravo 7, copy? Grant blinked, checking his roster. All vehicles accounted for. But the transmission repeated, this time in perfect mechanical mimicry. He responded with caution. Bravo 7, go ahead. Static filled the cabin. Then the same phrase echoed back with a subtle edge. Bravo 7, go ahead. In the mirror, headlights appeared. An additional set. Distant but precise, hanging in the mist beyond recognizable range. Grant frowned. His checklist showed no latecomers. As the convoy rounded a bend, the distant shape resolved itself. Another truck, nearly identical in make, model, and color. Grant toggled the radio, asking for verification. But each member of his convoy described seeing different reflections. One said 2 trucks behind them, another saw only their own. The CB channels split with interference, garbled voices hissing details that looped restlessly. Night pressed in. Grant urged the convoy forward, warning his drivers to stay close, maintain formation. Yet, in the peripheral vision of every mirror, the duplicate convoy remained. Matching speed, distance, pattern. Grant's chest tightened. The anxiety of decades of rational explanations straining against something unquantifiable. He recalled a story told in training. The phantom fleet, the warning that lost drivers sometimes became echoes in winter, unable to leave the roads they haunted. Snow began to fall with urgent density, obscuring refraction and blurring the world into grayscale. Grant's headlights cast circles of clarity that collapsed into shimmering patches of black ice. The duplicate trucks drew closer, their lights sometimes fizzing out, sometimes revealing not drivers, but dark humanoid shapes that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. Each license plate matched his own fleet, down to the registration stickers Grant had personally checked earlier. The CB flared alive again. Bravo 7, wrong route, said the voice, his own, but slowed and fractured. He replied, voice steady. Convoy running true, confirm position. Another transmission, this time a chorus of overlapping, broken voices. You're already there. You've always been there. Grant's heart thumped hard in his chest. He muted the CB, relying on visual cues to maintain distance, tension sharp in every muscle. Ahead, the lead truck reported a malfunction. The dashboard flickered, gauges looping through impossible sequences, speed readings doubling, then freezing. The rest of the convoy slowed in response, but the duplicate formation surged forward, headlights slicing sideways across the snowbanks. Grant squinted, seeking any anomaly that would explain the vision, Reflections, refractions, tricks of wind or light. He changed lanes, adjusting speed. The shapes matched every move, never crossing, never parting. It escalated rapidly. The snow intensified, shrouding the road with opaque sheets, muting the world to memory and anxiety. The duplicate trucks loomed out of the haze, and each time Grant tried to radio for help, the signal splintered into nonsense. Call signs reversed, voices filtered through static, as if the very air conspired with the unseen. He thought he saw faces in the lit windows, his own, pale and taut, staring forward with the intensity of purpose or fear. Suddenly, Grant's truck lost connection with the rest of the convoy. The dashboard went black. The engine juddered to a stop. He felt the cold creep into his bones as every sense sharpened, aware that any rational explanation was melting away in the dark. Ahead, the duplicate trucks drew parallel, moving with disturbing synchronicity. Their headlights never quite illuminating a face or license plate. Grant checked his phone. No signal. Time slipping between numbers, calendar dates looping out of logic. He stepped outside, boots crunching on frost, breath blooming in icy gusts. The world outside was quieter than it ought to be. The duplicate convoy had gathered, lining the road in an exact parade, a perfect twin of Grant's own fleet, every detail rendered with uncanny precision. He called out, voice swallowed by snow and distance. Shadows within the trucks shifted but never responded, engines idling in rhythm. Grant tried to move closer, but his feet felt heavy, every step weighed down by invisible pressure. Behind him, the reality of his own convoy flickered. Trucks vanished and reappeared, drivers sounded their horns in confused bursts. Grant's senses pinged between two worlds, the tangible, rational order of fleet management, and a warped reflection where every order gave rise to chaos. For a shattering moment, Grant saw himself reflected in the duplicate lead truck, face haggard and drained, eyes wild with a recognition he wanted to deny. A surge of adrenaline returned him to the cab. He restarted the engine, forcing the vehicle back onto the main route. In his mirrors, the duplicate convoy fragmented, splitting into wisps of shadow and pale light, then regrouping as his own formation caught up. The dashboard reanimated, the engine roared, and snow began to clear in erratic bursts. The radio spat out fractured messages. You finished the drive. You never finished the drive. Grant kept silent, eyes forward, refusing engagement. The rest of the fleet checked in, each voice tinged with a wariness that blurred the boundaries between routine and dread. The duplicate convoy faded, sometimes reappearing in the distance, headlights echoing through snow and dusk, never overtaking, never falling behind for long. The drivers murmured stories to themselves, struggling to maintain professional detachment. As the journey's end approached, Grant felt a heaviness settle in his mind, a certainty that something had crossed with them, entered the world of process and routine. The convoy reached the last checkpoint. Every truck parked in the designated rows, every cargo manifest ticked off. But Grant knew the night's balance had shifted, the logic of formation stretched and recalibrated. The road had recorded them in duplicate, every driver now carrying the twin burden of what they had seen. Back in his office, snow melting on boots and jacket, Grant reviewed the logs. The timestamps were corrupted, signatures overwritten, records splintered. Some bore familiar handwriting, others were reversed, details rewritten by invisible hands. When Grant looked up, he saw his own reflection in the frosted glass, a shade too pale, a split second too late. Each time he tried to recall the sequence of events, faces faded, voices blurring into static. He called the fleet's maintenance line, but every answer was stunted, half-spoken, looping through rehearsed protocols as if returning to the start of each day, each drive, each hazardous journey. The authorities filed the anomalies under weather interference. But among the drivers, the legend of the haunted convoy grew. It was said the duplicate fleet still crossed the snowy roads each night, forever out of reach, but never truly departed. A reminder to stay alert, stay rational. Never let the orderly world of traffic and cargo become a domain of shadows. Grant kept driving, professionally, relentlessly, compelled by duty and the assurance of process. But every winter, as the snows returned and roads emptied, he was haunted by the memory of doppelganger trucks, the eerie echo of his own voice in the CB, the sense that unfinished business still trailed behind. The world of logistics and sequence insisted that routes could be completed, inventories reconciled, every drive checked off as done. But Grant understood the deeper truth. For every mile driven, every convoy tracked, there was a reflection somewhere in the dark. A haunted fleet forever mirroring the living convoy, never quite catching up, never quite falling away. If every mile is haunted, he wondered, who among us truly finishes the drive? In the snow-swept quiet, he listened for answers. But all he ever heard was the hum of tires, the pulsing of headlights, and the continual static of roads that sometimes refused to let anyone go. There's nothing sinister about sunset until the route home splits into uncertainty. A detour forced by technology, pushing comfort and routine through a narrow passage of unfamiliar dusk. For Monica, a 36-year-old urban planner traveling cross-country for a short conference, the GPS was an ally against confusion, a digital map she trusted more than local signage or gut instinct. The city's edge fell away behind her, replaced by scattered farms and pine groves, every mile a reminder of how quickly habit could dissolve into improvisation. The day had been measured. Numbers on spreadsheets, plans for traffic flow, notes for a sleepy township that never quite caught up with her expectations. By departure time, Monica was hungry for the comfort of a commercial hotel, dinner ordered by room service, and the quiet certainty of locked doors. She set her route, let the traffic update algorithm push her into rural backroads, and watched as the world shrank into the golden haze of coming night. The first sign that something was wrong appeared in the form of a missed turn. Monica had driven this stretch before, but her GPS rerouted, promising a shortcut. 24 minutes to her destination, down a detour she'd never noticed. The road forked off with no warning, its recommended lane marked by temporary signage, pale against a deepening sky. Other travelers seemed to follow without complaint, trusting the wisdom of crowdsourcing. But as Monica merged onto the new path, the signal dropped. The mapping app glitched, freezing the ETA, the blue dots spinning as if caught between worlds. She frowned, annoyed yet resigned, and pressed onward. Headlights carving paths through gray fields and rows of abandoned machinery. In the clarifying silence, only the hum of her car and the soft shuffle of wind infiltrated Monica's thoughts. The road stretched on, a narrow ribbon flanked by rusting barbed wire and the odd glimmer of broken glass. She passed weathered billboards covered with peeling paint, trying to orient herself. But the familiar markers were gone. Every field and bend looked almost right, yet distinct in ways she could not articulate. Sunlight faded, color draining from the land, replaced by the sickly pallor of artificial orange radiating off the horizon. After a few minutes, her phone buzzed once. A text from the conference coordinator, out of sequence, time-stamped several hours ahead. Monica's skin prickled at the inconsistency. She checked her dashboard clock. It had reset back to the afternoon, out of sync with real time. The radio, usually steadfast, cycled through 3 stations before landing on static, a faint thread of musical notes bending in the background, haunting rather than cheerful. Monica's route shifted again. Signs appeared, first in English, then in languages she didn't recognize. One marker was upside down, another displayed mirrored text, while a third flickered between 2 alphabets as she passed. Disturbed, she snapped a picture for later proof, only to find her phone gallery empty, recent photos erased. The detour grew more surreal with each mile, land and language refusing to hold form. The car headlights flickered briefly as she rolled past a cluster of men wearing high-vis jackets. A road crew, she thought. Except none of their faces were visible in the dusk. Features blurred by motion or by the dissolving light. The workers spoke among themselves in voices turned backwards and inside out, syllables tumbling in patterns that made Monica's teeth ache. She offered a hesitant wave. One responded with a hand lifted too mechanically, as if rehearsed. A growing anxiety replaced irritation. The road narrowed further, twisting into a memory of something half-remembered from a novel. A path that didn't belong on any official map. A curve of pavement not quite grounded in place or time. Monica checked the dashboard again. Her radio now played her own voice, but looped and slowed. Words from past phone calls mumbled back at her by unseen lips. Following protocol, she attempted to turn around. The GPS showed no safe options. Every attempt to reroute forced her deeper into back roads that, by the fragmented clock, should have led straight to dawn. Yet the sky was only deepening, the blue-black gradation growing heavier, pressing Monica forward into layers of doubt and rising adrenaline. Without warning, a thick bank of fog rolled across the next intersection, swallowing all perspective. Monica's headlights fractured in the retreating mist, beams bouncing back as if repelled by a surface too close to touch. Visibility shrank to a few feet. Roadside markers dissolved. Panic threatened to bloom. She slowed, gripping the wheel until her knuckles paled, mind racing through every defensive driving course she'd ever half-dismissed. Moments later, the fog cleared, but the world had shifted. The road signs now displayed a language vaguely reminiscent of Cyrillic, then Japanese, then complete nonsense. Trees at the edges of the route bent sharply towards the pavement, as if listening or warning. And Monica wondered whether she was still following any real detour or whether technology had abandoned her for some twisted experiment. Her car radio hissed, then returned, broadcasting a local forecast for a town Monica knew had been dismantled years ago. The weather was described in terms that didn't make sense for November. Heat wave arriving, solar flares, red moon forecast for sunrise. She turned the dial, but every frequency echoed with thin, whining tones and half-audible names. Her own name among them, followed by repeats of, "Not arrived, not arrived." At the next crossroads, Monica caught sight of 2 old trucks parked together, facing opposite directions, each one's headlights pointed down separate lanes, as if daring her to choose a side. As she slowed, both engines died. The drivers inside lifted their hands to their faces, white gloves outlined in the failing light, then rolled up their windows at the same moment. Monica pressed her foot to the gas, desperate to leave behind whatever test or performance this had become. The detour lengthened without logic. Her ETA disappeared, time vanishing into the dense, bruised dusk. Her destination wasn't showing in any navigation system. And now landmarks were replaced by uncanny imitations, buildings from her childhood, a school bus abandoned by the roadside, faces in shadow that seemed to recognize her. Monica's sense of reality bent under pressure. paranoia interlacing with the mundane act of driving. Finally, nearly 2 hours after she'd left the conference, Monica saw the city's lights begin to materialize between trees, their geometry shaky and untrustworthy. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a flood of notifications time-stamped in reverse. First from dawn, then mid-afternoon, looping back to the present. Every message read, "Arrived late, don't wait up." She entered town, the buildings off-kilter and smaller than memory, and pulled over near the conference hotel. All clocks in her car rolled backwards, dashboard flickering as if the universe itself was out of sync. Monica stepped free of the car and tried to call the coordinator, but the phone only made static, her own voice repeating the phrase, "Home is never where you left it." In the following days, Monica's sense of time remained unstable. Alarms rang hours too early or too late, food lost its flavor, and local traffic patterns changed unpredictably each morning. She began collecting screenshots and audio recordings, searching for proof that the detour hadn't merely been a data error or exhausted fantasy. Conference attendees spoke of similar experiences, lost time, bent paths, memories swapped for dreams. But no one offered an explanation, and everyone carried a quiet anxiety into their work. Every subsequent drive, Monica avoided shortcuts, even the most logical ones, choosing familiar routes she knew matched the map, checking road signs twice. The technology never glitched again, yet the memory of dusk on the detour haunted every turn, a lingering question on every empty stretch. If the fastest road to comfort can sometimes be the longest road back, how can anyone trust their sense of arrival? Sometimes she replayed the backward broadcasts, the indecipherable road crew voices, searching for a code or warning in the jumble of sound. Sometimes she watched for the same abandoned trucks, expecting to see white gloves at every crossroads. But most often, Monica simply told herself that home was a privilege rarely granted to those who challenged the certainty of night. The next time she set out on a long drive, Monica placed her faith not in GPS nor computer-generated detours, but in the unreliable wisdom of her own fear. A fear sharpened now by experience, never again dismissed as mere superstition. From that night on, she believed in the power of return, in the need to travel slow and trust only the signs written in the language of ordinary dusk. For as long as the roads could be bent by technological failure, they could also be bent back again by remembering one simple truth. The shortest route is not always the way home, and sometimes the longest nightmare is the one that seems to shortcut safety for a moment, only to reroute reality for hours. On a lonely stretch of rural highway, the world is most defined not by what you see, but by what you hear. For Conrad, a 42-year-old scientist and radio expert, the collision of static and broadcast was more familiar than family. He had spent a lifetime tuning frequencies, sorting signals from noise, chasing distant storms across crackling AM waves. Yet one frigid autumn night, parked near a sagging row of radio towers that had outlived their usefulness, he tuned in to something he wasn't meant to hear. The landscape was as barren as the upper atmosphere, pockets of mist pooling between wire fences and cracked pavement. Conrad should have reached the tower by sunset, but weather and a late experiment kept him on the road past midnight. With every mile, the border between civilization and the vast unknown pressed in, marked only by the flicker of his dash lights and the slow build of a roaring silence beyond the engine. His task was simple: inspect the towers, confirm their out-of-service status, log electromagnetic readings, and return to the comfort of laboratory routine. But that night, routine gave way to possibility. As he coasted off the main highway onto the aging service road, the darkness deepened, settling around him like a shroud. The towers loomed overhead, skeletal against the sky, red lights winking in a sequence that never quite repeated. Conrad unpacked his signal scanner, swept through the usual frequencies. He expected nothing but static, a low hiss, the flutter of distant news, perhaps the hum of an emergency beacon. Instead, his headset found a distinct voice, clear, urgent, and hauntingly misplaced. "Help me," the transmission repeated. This is the North Channel. No reception, no rescue." He adjusted the dials, isolating the timestamp embedded in the transmission. The numbers were wrong, dated decades ago, a year Conrad associated only with family stories and childhood memories. But the voice persisted, alternating between panic and resignation, telling of fire on a bridge, a stalled engine, a name clearly stated. Clara, recruiting anyone. Startled, Conrad documented the event, saving the snippet of sound, cross-referencing it against regional databases for missing persons and emergency calls. No records matched the broadcast, no mention of Clara, no fire on any bridge for that year. He drove closer to the towers. Fog thickened, antennas vanishing upward into infinity. Conrad's scanner pinged again, this time with a train of voices. Some were calm, some frantic, each one detailing events, disasters, roadblocks, missing people, all dated for the next hour, the next morning, the next week. The frequency never matched the local spectrum. It danced just outside the permissible band, as if the laws of electromagnetism bent for these transmissions. For a scientist, fear was data. Conrad jotted down every new call, logging the coordinates, timestamps, and emotional tone. Yet the longer he listened, the more the voices converged in urgency. Some began pleading with him by name, using memories he had never shared aloud. A boating trip as a child, a lost friend, a rumor about a signal that predicted catastrophe. Struggling for explanations, Conrad scanned for technical errors, atmospheric phenomena, pranksters. His phone failed. Emergency apps returned only blank screens and looping notifications. He tried to reach out to networks, but his message was relayed back to him, pitch shifted and distorted, as if someone or something was intercepting every transmission. The signals grew louder, overlapping with the rumble of his heartbeat. As the night wore on, Conrad became convinced he was being led. The coordinates given on one broadcast pointed to a crossroad miles ahead, a patch known locally as Lost Contact Zone, where radio silence always defeated even the best gear. Conrad hesitated, checking his maps, then followed the prompt, increasingly driven by curiosity rather than caution. When he reached the spot, the air shimmered oddly, as if the laws of physics were being tested. Towers loomed larger, mist now tinged with blue. Conrad parked and stepped into the haze. Headset primed. The ground beneath his boots vibrated with unnatural energy, a low hum cycling through frequencies without human intervention. Then the voices changed, no longer pleading, but predicting. One outlined an accident. Car overturned near you in 6 minutes. Don't stop. Another whispered his own name, recounting memories decades old, secrets and failures, possibilities that never materialized. The transmissions became a chorus, each bidding Conrad to act. "Warn them," one pleaded. "If you're listening, save someone tonight." His rational mind struggled. Signals couldn't predict future events. He checked his clock, watching it oscillate. But then, across the road, headlights approached. A van teetering over a patch of ice, swerving dangerously. Conrad shouted a warning, strobing his flashlight, and the van stopped. Driver shaken but unharmed. The voice on the frequency shifted from panic to calm, repeating, "Accident avoided. Thank you." Before Conrad could process what happened, the voices multiplied. Some anxious, some resigned, echoing old disasters, new emergencies. Every broadcast was linked to a place, a time, a deadly possibility. Each that Conrad heeded shifted its outcome. A cold, calculated sequence of actions that bent reality just enough to thread safety through chaos. As the hours slipped by, Conrad felt his purpose splinter between scientist and guardian. The towers hummed with impossible energy, broadcasting messages that seemed to originate not from this time, but many times. A layered accumulation of lost souls, desperate broadcasts left unanswered, looping forever until someone listened. The logic defied his training, but the urgency was undeniable. The last transmission of the night came in a whisper, calm and chilling. "If you're listening, tonight, don't stop near mile marker 17. The lost ones are guiding you." Conrad followed the advice, turning away before reaching the spot. A cold patch notorious in local legend for unexplainable disappearances. He returned to the main highway, shaken and hungry for daylight. The world outside the zone felt different, a little brighter, a little duller. Conrad's scanner returned to normal function, cell networks rebooted with the first light. Yet in every subsequent radio sweep, he caught traces of the voices. The Clara, the accidents avoided, the near disasters rerouted through his decisions. He logged the signals, constructed a new protocol, determined to share what he'd learned. Sometimes the lost are not silent, but persistent, pushing the living into course corrections and timely rescues. Over the following weeks, Conrad's expertise expanded beyond engineering. He became a local fixture, sought by travelers for advice, haunted by the notion that every empty patch of road holds spectral broadcasts, hints and warnings, ghosts and signals. He devised instruments to amplify the right bands, documented every case. Night journeys became his signature. People whispered that he could avert fate with a well-timed message, drive through death's corridor guided by invisible hands. Some called him superstitious, others a fraud. But every time Conrad ignored a mysterious warning, the world responded. A collision, a fire, a missing person, all documented afterward. With each intervention, the voices on the radio became calmer, more grateful. The cold fact remained. His understanding of science and reality expanded beneath the weight of conspiracy and empathy. Occasionally, late at night, Conrad caught the old pleas again. Clara's name, the lost coordinates, stories unrecorded. He learned to reply, offering comfort as best he could, wishing the voices peace. The roads outside Lost Contact Zone grew safer in small increments, each drive a tacit agreement between Conrad and those who could only reach him through static. A shared hope that listening, recording, responding was not just technical, but existential. The lesson endured. Not every signal is meant to be decoded, but every warning holds value. Sometimes the highway speaks with the voice of the lost, pleading for rescue, guiding those who hear. And sometimes, a lone expert in the mist, armed with data and empathy, is all they need to be found, and to find others before disaster strikes. The high bridge was always lonely after midnight, suspended like a razor over a valley thick with shadow. Marissa, 29, a road maintenance supervisor with a mind tuned to stats and risk assessment, had learned to trust data above all. Bridges were designed for certainty, load calculations, structural redundancy, predictive scheduling. But tonight, certainty refused to cooperate. The numbers behind her inspection log didn't match anything she could see. She parked her maintenance van at the bridge's midpoint, hovering on the threshold between two districts neither claimed. Traffic reports had projected 0 vehicles for the next hour, her scheduled inspection perfectly isolated. And yet the night pulsed with a tension she couldn't shake. The air clung to the steel, damp and electric, her breath fogging against the windshield in a rhythm too steady to be soothing. Marissa keyed her walkie for the routine check-in. Bridge 11 secure, weather clear, commencing night survey. Silence responded, except for the feeble hum of her own engine. She preferred isolation. Work flowed best when distraction vanished. The silence tonight, though, felt heavier. Her focus narrowed to the illuminated spans and the pale sweep of her headlamp. The first anomaly came as a flicker. Wrong-way headlights in the distance, pale gold and sharp against the black. She checked her tablet. The bridge was closed, both entrances sealed for the night. No one should be here. She flicked on the roof beacon and waited, eyes tracking the shape as it approached. The vehicle was older than any log to pass this way, a boxy sedan crusted with age and rain. Every line reminiscent of outdated models Marissa remembered from childhood. The car halted just ahead, a moment frozen, engine idling. She radioed for possible breach, her message vanishing into static. The sedan's headlights faded, dying out as if the batteries had been drained not by time or use, but by the sheer intensity of the night. Marissa stepped from her van, boots crunching softly. She wanted a rational answer: late commuter, navigation error, lost driver. As she advanced, the driver's window rolled down. She saw a woman's face, frantic, hair fanned wildly. Her lips moved, but Marissa heard nothing except the soft crackle of electricity between lamp poles. The sedan peeled away without warning, vanishing into mist that didn't exist seconds before, leaving the bridge untouched. The log in Marissa's tablet reset. The license plate erased, the timestamp now misaligned. She ran the numbers again, knowing every data set could glitch. But the entire inspection record seemed to have rewritten itself. She noted the error, taking photos, documenting everything she could. But each image blurred, shapes distorted and impossible to parse. Trying to distract herself, Marissa reviewed the bridge's pressure sensors. The system recorded a single crossing, but the details conflicted. The weight signature was anomalous, showing not one car but dozens in close proximity, overlapping in ways no convoy ever could. She checked adjacent surveillance feeds via her phone, expecting fuzzy footage or animal movement. What she found shook her. The crossing recorded live was not just from tonight, but also footage from 30 years ago. Another night, another vehicle. Same location, same direction. The figures in the old video wore clothes from a different decade. Faces frozen in worry, gestures frantic. The timestamp insisted the time was now, not then. The system replayed the crossing as a loop, faces and cars returning with uncanny regularity. Marissa paged through data logs. Her own credentials were replaced by another name, another ID, someone who had vanished from records decades ago. Her pulse quickened. She toggled back to her live window. There, on the screen, was her van, her own features reflected in the glass, but different somehow. Her hair rearranged, a jacket she didn't recognize, posture stiff with uncertainty. Rattled, Marissa stepped back outside, scanning the far side of the bridge. Lights flickered distantly. The air seemed to ripple and bend. She remembered childhood tales her mother had told, stories of bridges that connected not towns, but times, ferrying desperate souls back and forth across years with no warning. The technical side of her brain rebelled, searching for code error, insufficient bandwidth, electromagnetic interference. She walked the span, boots ringing against cold metal, headlamp beam cutting the dark. She tried calling colleagues for confirmation. The signal died, messages looped, phone clock spinning backward every few seconds. The night felt drawn out, each minute billowing into hours, each noise carried on wind that refused to settle. As she neared the center, Marissa's senses sharpened. In the low ambient light, she glimpsed something impossible. A second set of headlights approaching, moving the wrong way again with slow, deliberate precision. Data said there should be no one here, every record corroborating the fact. Yet here it was, burning against the stats, burning against the rules. Feeling a surge of duty, Marissa waved her beacon, signaling stop. The headlights hesitated, then flickered out, leaving the bridge blank and silent. She advanced, scanning for tire marks, footprints, any physical sign. The only evidence left behind was a faint impression, an indent from decades of crossings, pressed deep into the steel as if history insisted itself into physical reality. Returning to her van, Marissa reviewed security tapes and data logs. Each attempt at analysis led back to confusion. The live footage replayed her own nightly movements, but the figure in the recording grew less familiar each time. The face sharpened into a stranger's, gestures repeated but detached, as if she were watching herself through a distorted lens. Her credentials no longer matched, reports filed under names she did not recognize. At the far end of the bridge, tremors shook the steel. Minor ripples, dismissed as inconsequential by last year's engineering report. Tonight, though, each vibration grew in urgency, bearing the weight of lost years. Marissa gripped the railing, feeling the passage of reality tighten around her. The bridge rattled. Time appeared to fracture into fragments, the scenery around her flickering between now and then, past and present. In a final surge, Marissa checked her location data. The system showed she had never arrived, never left, only existed as a repeating interval. Just another figure looping through nightly inspections, her presence erased and replaced across countless data sets. She tried updating the logs, stamping the system with her ID, but every file auto-corrected, every signature blurred. When dawn arrived, the bridge returned to normal. The trembling ceased, headlights faded, surveillance footage reset. Marissa finished her inspection, filed her report, but every document listed a different supervisor. A long stream of names, each dating back to the bridge's opening, each erased after a single midnight. Her logbook showed blank entries where her signature should have been. Driving away from the high bridge, Marissa felt changed, not frightened, but uncertain, caught in the twisting of a new kind of logic. The world proved willing to erase her, to replace her with other stories and other voices whenever certainty slipped. Yet she also sensed the obligations of routine, the need to keep watching the span, to keep warning of crossings and tremors, even if her part in the story would never be preserved. In the weeks that followed, Marissa checked every report twice, marking time with physical notations no algorithm could override. She watched for strange cars, for old faces flickering in surveillance feeds, for tremors that seemed to carry the weight of 40 years in a single second. Every night at the bridge became an act of balancing, observing, reporting, holding onto reality even as the world tried to untether her from every anchor she knew. The lesson was simple, if unsettling. If roads record memories, sometimes those memories erase us. Every town trusts a watcher to keep the numbers true. But sometimes the watcher must accept that keeping vigil may mean vanishing into history. a data point erased in favor of a living story on a midnight bridge, forever humming with the echoes of those who drove the wrong way, again and again, searching for a way home. Fog is the true custodian of the remote highways, sometimes revealing the landscape in spectral flashes, sometimes sealing away entire worlds in silence and blind despair. Nathan, 34 and an environmental consultant by trade, had learned to measure the world by patterns. Rainfall, migration, the signature frequencies of birdsong or rushing water. Yet beyond the border of familiarity, past the abandoned overpass and skeletal marshes, those patterns break, realigning to rules that no scientist or wanderer can trust. And on the night that Nathan charted what he thought would be his final field readings, the highway surrendered itself to a static unlike any he'd ever heard. He drove with the windows cracked, inhaling the scent of wet earth and distant pine. Even in early winter, the fog pooled thick as milk, gliding across the pavement in curdling ropes. Nathan's dashboard pulsed with soft blue. The signal reader in the passenger seat, his real companion for the trip, showed sharp, healthy spikes of normal transmission. A perfect night for data, he thought, sidelining superstition in favor of logic and math. A detour appeared, a fork in the road bearing no signage but a flickering caution light, orange for warning, its rhythm off by fractions of a second. Nathan hesitated, but the GPS was insistent. He turned down the dead end, eager to sample what the untouched landscape might reveal. The road spilled him into a cul-de-sac, flanked by mossy gravel, broken posts, and the fading outline of a picnic shelter. Nathan parked, stretched, and listened. The only sound was the cold hiss of static, more pronounced here than anywhere else on the night's drive. As he began his readings, the frequency analyzer pinged. An anomaly, singing at intervals that defied the environmental background. Nathan tuned a small radio to match, and the landscape responded. Every time he adjusted the dial, the world outside grew sharper, then stranger. A faint melody played, a children's song warped by age, drifting across the bog. Each new station summoned a change. The fog deepened, then receded. The marshes grew loud with frog chorus, then fell dead again. Lights at the far edge of the cul-de-sac flickered in subtle ways, always seeming to redraw the shape of the shadows, never content with a single form. With each adjusted frequency, Nathan felt compelled to walk the edges of the clearing, taking recordings, marking data. Yet with every step, his surroundings wobbled unpredictably. Trees bent, shrunk, grew impossibly tall. Brambles rearranged. Even distant thunder seemed to harmonize with the tune pulsing through his radio. He checked his timepiece. It jumped wildly, resetting with the signal's pitch, minutes leaping and falling in jarring increments. Nathan grew conscious, then obsessed with the interplay of tuning and reality. He scribbled frantic notes, describing each transformation. Mud lanes opening where nothing should exist, blue mist giving way to dry heat, the sky cracking into yellow lightning without storm or warning. The dead end became a palette for nature's impossible whims, painted fresh at his command. Then the world malfunctioned in earnest. Nathan's radio caught a clear, human voice in the midst of static. "Don't leave. The song keeps you safe." Each syllable seemed to vibrate through his bones, not just his ears. He tried to reply, recording a message. His own voice played back as a child's, garbled and echoing. "Nathan, come home." He retreated to the car, unsettled, feeling watched not by animals or curious ghosts, but by the land itself, drawn into a two-way dance with machinery and memory. Intent on resolving the phenomena, Nathan rechecked his field readings, finding not one but dozens of environmental signatures, each one perfectly plausible yet entirely different from the last. The marsh was alternately dry, flooded, frozen, overgrown. The road beyond the cul-de-sac flickered through possible futures. Cracked and ruined, pristine, buried under fallen trees, or simply vanished. Reality itself responded to the radio, as though each frequency unlocked a new, fully fleshed-out possibility. A sentence from old graduate school rose up unbidden. When the world doesn't make sense, it's either you or the world. Nathan found no comfort in that dichotomy now. He tried to escape, starting the engine, but the car sputtered and failed. Radio still tuned to a frequency that sounded like the end of the universe. In the cockpit silence, Nathan's mind split between scientific method and pure survival. He retuned the dial, desperate for a way out. The fog outside thinned, then thickened, then drew closer than ever, pressing against the windows as if alive. He braced, heart racing, hands shaking. The voice returned, softer now. If you want to leave, choose your signal. Choose your reality. Driven more by instinct than design, Nathan cycled through the frequencies, each one unleashing new shifts, colors inverted, memories intruding that felt lived and imagined at once, visions of distant roads intersecting his own. The landscape flickered to deep night, then roaring daylight, then a moment of cosmic silence so complete he thought he was falling through empty space. At last, he breached the right band. The fog lifted, the chorus of frogs returned, and the path home appeared, glowing with surreal clarity. Nathan started the engine. The radio played a familiar tune, his favorite from years ago, clear, normal, and comforting. He drove, leaving the dead end behind, and watched the world outside return to ordinary shape. The highway greeted him with familiar lampposts, the GPS recalibrating as if to apologize for the night's anomaly. In the days and weeks that followed, Nathan was haunted not by ghosts or monsters, but by the knowledge that reality itself was negotiable, malleable under the influence of unseen signal. He checked every frequency, every corner of background static, searching for one that felt slightly off, slightly dangerous. Sometimes, when he was drifting into sleep, he heard the dead-end melody again. Soft, inviting, a promise of unlimited landscapes waiting just beyond rational understanding. He published his findings, then spent years tracking similar anomalies. Travelers contacted him, recounting dreams of cul-de-sacs that changed with a song, highways that vanished, signals that led them to futures they couldn't explain. Nathan refused to become a prophet, but he never again dismissed chance, nor the vast, haunted power of a simple radio dial. The world is shaped not only by roads and rivers, but by the frequencies we choose to follow, and the landscape spun from static. Sometimes all it takes is a note, a station, a tune born from fog and marsh, to slip briefly between realities and find a forever haunted by possibility. If this story resonated, if you felt the land shifting beneath your feet or the hair rising at a haunting frequency, don't let these chills vanish into static. Smash that subscribe button for Verified Fears, where true darkness travels with you, and every journey can bend reality. Share your own road trip legends below, and remember, the next story you hear could be your own.